Well, I don't often do this, but I saw something that was so remarkable. I feel like I have to react to it, and it was a viral video from, I believe, back in February, of an interview that the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, did with the president of Azerbaijan. I believe during the time of that flare-up with the war in Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh, as the Armenians call it. It was between, the Azeris and the Armenians, and they were fighting over the land, and I believe Azerbaijan eventually won. And the BBC was, over there interviewing the president, whose name I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce, but I believe it was like Ilham Aliyev. That's my best guess. That is I believe they use a different script over in Azerbaijan than Roman script, so but based on how it's written in characters that I can read, that I believe is how his name is pronounced. And the guy speaks, great English, as a lot of world leaders do. A lot of these guys from smaller countries who have, native tongues that are not widely spoken in the rest of the world. They go to schools where they learn, just about perfect English. Because that's just going to be the language of instruction in a in a very high tier school. I don't know too much about Aliyev. I probably, if my memory serves correctly, because I think he was one of the old Soviet leaders, probably a higher-ranking Communist Party guy, if I remember correctly. Azerbaijan, of course, was a Soviet Socialist Republic prior to 1991. And in the interview, the BBC is questioning him about censoring critics and not having free media in Azerbaijan, and how the opposition is not, doesn't get to be heard and whatnot. And based on what research I could do, and it's hard to find sources that are not just neoliberal NGO think tanks putting out things about a government that clearly the Western neoliberal establishment is not a fan of for whatever reason. So pretty much everything that you're going to Google about censorship in Azerbaijan is going to be negative, but you have to look through the spin on it and try and figure out exactly what they're saying. Because a lot of the criticisms that I was reading of Azerbaijan's media was that, because his defense, let me get to his defense first, and then I'll get to the real kicker, to the reason why this interview, kind of blew up on Twitter. So the BBC comes to him and says, hey, President Aliyev, you guys in Azerbaijan here, you don't have free media. The Armenians, who live under Azeri rule, they're not treated well. And this is why, you have a war, because they're really scared. They don't want to be under your authority. They want to be ruled by Armenia because you're scary bad guys. And so Aliyev's response is that, hey, how can you say that we don't have independent media here? Our internet is totally, free of censorship, and 80% of our people, have internet access. So, the media is as free as people want it to be. People can say whatever they want. He cited, I forget how many millions of people that they have on Facebook. People post whatever they want, and so therefore we have free media. Now, from what I understand, that doesn't seem to be exactly true. So this is not. I'm not here to be a special pleader for the Azeri government. I'm not. I don't think that this guy is 100% telling the truth. It seems like there are some legitimate criticisms of his government when it comes to media censorship in particular, and even internet censorship, because it seems like he was trying to deflect from the censorship of other kinds of media, which kind of would be appropriate if he's like, oh, so what if we don't have any opposition TV channels, nobody watches TV, everybody gets their news online, and the internet's totally censorship free. That's a pretty easy thing to check, whether or not a government censors the internet or not, because either they do it or they don't. So based on what I've seen, it seems like there are some websites that are, international media websites or independent media websites that have been blocked in Azerbaijan by the government, which seems to have like governments in most parts of the world, a pretty strong connection to the telecoms industry. And so I'm not going to come out here, and again, this video is not about internet censorship in Azerbaijan. That's not the focus here. And and I'm not, I'm no expert, but my point is to say that it seems like this question from the BBC was rooted somewhat in reality and was, somewhat, a fair question, given just, what I've seen. If I were talking to the president of Azerbaijan about the subject of internet censorship, I would ask a couple of questions too, just based on what I've seen. I would cite specific examples and say, like, hey, is it true that you guys blocked this website? If so, what was the reason? And there's also seemed to be a lot of accusations of people who said things negative about the government online and then were sent to prison on what appeared to be trumped up charges. And that's, of course, whether or not they're trumped up or not is an opinion. I didn't look into the specifics of each of these cases. All I'm saying is that these questions are out there and they exist. So, what was the real kicker here that President Ilham Aliyev of Azerbaijan was able to sort of KO this BBC reporter and really own the neolibs? Well, he brought up the elephant in the room, which was Assange, and he said, who are you to criticize, our country for censoring media? Our media's, of course he's going to say, our media is totally free. We have no censorship. But you guys, you locked up Assange. And what did you lock him up for? Did he murder anybody? No. You locked him up because he was operating as a journalist and doing good journalism work and reporting things that you didn't like. That's why you locked him up. And her defense instantly is like, well, I didn't lock up anybody, and this is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about your country. We're not talking about my country. And it's like, well, excuse me, Miss BBC, you're state media. So when he says you locked up Assange, he's correct, because you are the British government. You're an agent of the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom are the ones who locked up Assange and, sent him off to America to be, killed, essentially. And so really, if you are going after basic press freedoms as well, who are you to be castigating the leaders of these these small post-Soviet countries who might not have the freest press in the world when you don't either? He who lives in a glass house shall not throw stones. And the West has to realize that they can't get away with just having their own political prisoners and then getting mad at the rest of the world for doing the same thing, even if the rest of the world is doing it in a more severe fashion, in a more widespread fashion than a lot of these Western countries. Even if you can get away with saying more negative things about these Western governments than you can about these other governments, in principle, or I should say, the Western governments have nowhere to stand in principle, neither does the Western media, particularly the state media like BBC, but even CNN, which is essentially state media. Everyone knows that. CNN, since the 90s, since the Yugoslav wars, has been understood to be a U.S. state media. It has totally eclipsed official U.S. state media, which was, PBS. Of course, Voice of America, which is state media, is still quite prominent in the rest of the world in international news. But you're in no position to principally criticize these smaller governments who do, in principle, the same thing that your government does. This is one of the problems of censoring Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and others like them for the United States, is that we no longer have any leg to stand on when it comes to trying to advocate for liberty in other countries if we don't give those liberties to our own citizens. How is the U.S. going to claim to serve as some sort of example for the rest of the world when they are doing, again, in principle, the same things that these other governments are doing? The only thing that separates Assange from a political prisoner, from a persecuted journalist in a country like Turkey or Azerbaijan, is which government he offended. He happened to offend the United States government, and so according to U.S. media, that makes him somehow different than these journalists who offended the governments of Azerbaijan or Turkey. And just to clarify, I don't mean to compare Azerbaijan to Turkey. I was just using Turkey because that's an example of a country that is, considered to be pretty arduous when it comes to independent journalism. and has locked up a lot of journalists, supposedly. I don't mean to say that Azerbaijan is like that. I don't know that. All I'm saying is that, they're accused of that, and if there's any credible accusations of that, it is impossible for anyone who is at all associated with the governments of the United States or of the United Kingdom or a lot of these other countries, certainly Canada. I mean, Canada's terrible on free speech. Australia, I'd imagine, is pretty bad, although I can't think of any terrible examples offhand. But I mean, Canada, it's illegal to misgender someone. That, which again is obviously, a little pet issue of the neoliberal regime. So congratulations to Ilham Aliyev, Ilham Aliyev. I believe I'm saying that somewhat correctly. You found a good way. If you were doing, if you had some kind of scandal that this could have been, you very effectively deflected from that by pointing out the hypocrisy of the BBC. And to anyone in the West who is upset when you see a clip like this and say, "Oh God, that liar! He's just deflecting. He wants to talk about things that have nothing to do with this." You should really blame your own governments for being hypocritical. Or maybe you should, blame yourself, because unless you're someone who criticizes the United States and the United Kingdom for their treatment of Assange, you're in no position, really, to criticize these other governments. Because, I have to tell you, if I was the one sitting there interviewing this guy and I had some interest in talking about the censorship in Azerbaijan, and he said, "Well, hey, what about Assange, huh?" I would say, "No, I agree. It's terrible what they're doing to Assange." Assange just exposed, the cover-up of the killing of some Reuters journalists, and for that he is being, persecuted for embarrassing the United States government and the horrible, terrible, no-good war on terror. And if I responded that way, I don't know what Ilham Aliyev would have said, but that might have, that might not have been the answer that he was hoping for, and it might have made it difficult for him to deflect from the issue. Because I would say, yes, of course, I of course call out the censorship and the persecution of journalists committed by my own government. I hold them to just as high a standard as anyone. But the issue here, of course, is why are you doing that? Just because the United States does it doesn't make it right. So why would it be right for you to do it? That's how an honest journalist who is concerned about censorship should have responded to him. Instead, what did the BBC do? Did they air the full uncut interview? No, they cut this question from the final televised interview. And the president of Azerbaijan, of course, he wouldn't do an interview without getting a copy of it, he put it out himself and said, "Hey, look what the BBC decided to take out. I wonder why they cut this clip. Obviously, it's because I won the exchange and because I'm right, and the BBC wants to censor that." By being hypocrites, the BBC gave him a huge propaganda win. And I don't mean propaganda in a derogatory sense. I mean that the president of Azerbaijan can credibly go on television and say, "Hey, look, this was my response to the BBC's question. They had no follow-up to that. They just wanted to change the subject. So obviously I'm telling the truth in that 80% of our people have internet access and our internet is totally censorship-free, yet the United Kingdom locked up Assange for doing good journalism." I don't know that 80% of people in Azerbaijan have internet access and that the internet is totally censorship-free. When I heard him say that, I had my doubts. I thought, wow, there's a country that I've never heard of, or that I never thought about having free internet, that has totally free internet. This is great. I should look it up. And then I look it up, and I didn't see, because if a country has totally censorship-free internet, that would be the exception, not the rule. And if I don't see a bunch of people talking about, "Hey, this is great. Wow, a country that actually has zero internet censorship," I start to think, well, you probably have somewhere that you're not telling us about. But again, the hack journalists at the BBC were unable to uncover the truth of the matter because they were too busy covering up what inconvenient truths were coming out of that interview. So, just an interesting clip that I thought I could highlight, and I thought there was an important lesson to be learned there. So, with that said, I think I'll leave things there.